Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. So this week I've got a question from one of my subscribers. This one is from Sandy from Slovenia, and he says, "What is your opinion about attic listening rooms studios? Are they acoustically better because of the sloped ceiling? Are there less chances of standing waves because at least two surfaces are not parallel?" I think this is a great question because it raises a common misconception about room shapes and standing waves that I want to address in this video. So let's jump right in. The point is that every room has standing waves. There are no exceptions to this, okay? The shape only dictates the pattern of these standing waves in the room, yeah? So mainly at what frequency they show up and how strong they are. In acoustics, we usually differentiate between three types of standing waves or room modes, right? So we get axial modes, we get tangential modes, and we get oblique modes. Axial modes are the ones that we tend to think about when we're talking about standing waves. So this is where they form between two parallel walls, right? The wavelength fits exactly between these two surfaces, and so the sound kind of bounces from one wall, bounces between the two walls. You get that interference pattern, and that causes the peaks and dips that we see in the frequency response, and also the ringing associated with this resonance of the room. This one is also the strongest room mode or standing wave, typically in terms of effect. Now, the tangential and oblique modes, they form over more complex kind of geometric paths. Okay, so they might touch more than just two surfaces, and they tend to be less strong. But so when you're in a room with angled surfaces or an attic with an angled ceiling, you might reduce the chance of getting a certain axial mode because you don't have those two particular parallel surfaces, but you still get plenty of tangential and oblique modes. And although they might be less strong, they're still very much present, and the effect of standing waves is still very much there. So it doesn't really matter what shape your room is, if a certain wavelength fits in the room following one of these standing wave patterns, you will get those standing waves. And that means you always get standing waves, no matter what shape a room is. Now, the problem with rooms with angled walls or angled ceilings like an attic is that it becomes really hard or almost impossible to predict at which frequencies these particular standing waves will form in that room. Now, that might be just fine, but it might also not be fine because they all end up, or some of them at least, end up piling up on top of each other, aggravating the problem and causing even deeper dips and higher peaks. You basically end up with an acoustic kind of foundation, if you will, in the low end that makes it harder to get a balanced low end. Of course, the problem is that you don't know whether this is the case until you actually start setting up your studio, because you can't actually predict that pattern in advance. And again, this is the case for any odd-shaped room, any room with angled surfaces, angled ceilings, being an attic or otherwise. But bringing this back to reality, or rather putting this into the larger context once again, especially for home studios, most rooms we work with aren't optimized for shape or size, right? We're working with our bedrooms, our basements, our spare whatever rooms, our attics, obviously, yeah? And none of these were specifically built to be music studios, and so they were never optimized in shape or size. And so even with standard square rooms, we often work with unfavorable shapes where you still get that same problem of the standing waves potentially piling up on top of each other, or even not forming in a certain frequency band and creating kind of lacking support in energy. That can also happen. The only difference with a square room is that you can potentially calculate that to a reasonable degree in advance. But even that doesn't make all that much of a difference in the end if you can't actually, or if you're not going to end up shifting walls around. Yeah, you're still gonna work with what you've got. So with home studios, it's not really worth obsessing about room shapes all that much. It's just an aspect that we can't really control. It's also just one aspect of many that lead to a good sounding studio, a good sounding room. And that means that other aspects like the room size and where you place your listening position, for example, shift up in priority in relation to the actual room shape, because you just can't really do anything about it. Because especially with unfavorable patterns of standing waves or room modes, it becomes so much more important to actually find the room's low-end sweet spot, so the spot where the kind of the low end, those standing waves balance out against each other as best as possible, and then locate your listening position there and build your entire setup around that spot. But bringing this back to the original question of an attic studio and whether it can help to reduce standing waves or reduce their impact, the short answer is no. This wasn't really an option to begin with. All rooms have standing waves. And with a home studio, because you can't really adapt or change the standing wave pattern in the first place, your priority just shifts to other things, like, for example, how much treatment you're willing to put in the room, and maybe even more importantly, the location of your listening position. By the way, if you need help with that, I've got a home studio treatment framework that you can download for free at the link in the description, and that will help guide you through that process of treating your studio, figuring out what to do at what stage in the treatment process. Yeah, I mean, there are so many aspects, like, for example, the room shape aspect to this process of treating your studio. And it's really important to know what to focus on at what stage, so you don't end up turning in circles and having to redo things or reevaluate aspects that you maybe forgot at a earlier stage, but you really had to at that point. So these are my 5 steps to treating a home studio and getting it to translate. It's all in there, the process that I recommend you follow from start to finish, big picture, to treat your home studio. And again, you can download that for free at the link in the description. All right, with that, I hope that answers the question and gives you some perspective on this whole aspect of standing waves. Yeah, you can't get rid of them. Every room has standing waves. The question is, how do you deal with it? And with that, let's get back to learning to trust our ears and having fun making music in the studio. That's what it's all about after all. I'll see you in the next video.